Hello, I'm David Magdo, and I'm happy to be here on behalf of Open Your Eyes and Think MF and ADOC. We are in a great moment here in 2021 in terms of documentaries and in terms of Asian American documentaries. Just this year, this season, we have over 18 or 19 feature documentaries by Asian Americans, Asian Pacific Americans that were either directed or produced by us. And so we're here to document this time. And today, we're so pleased as part of this, I guess, series, we have two amazing, legendary filmmakers who will be in conversation with us. And that is Ramona S. Diaz, whose film this year is A Thousand Cuts, and Jeff Orlowski, who this year, his film is The Social Dilemma. So please welcome Ramona S. Diaz and Jeff Orlowski.
Thank you so much, David. It's great to be
David.
here with you, Ramona.
Yeah, it's great. David, legendary. It makes me feel old.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's great to be here, Jeff. I mean, we were just talking, right? A year ago, at this time last
Yeah,
year, we were both at Sundance. Both our
right.
films premiered then. And I remember,
Yep.
when for Sundance first announces and you look down the list and I saw Social Dilemma, I'm like, oh my God, that like so intersects with A Thousand Cuts. That's why it was like fun
Yeah,
to see. So, and here we are a year later. It's been quite a ride.
absolutely. It's been
That
a
film.
wild, wild year for sure. And likewise, when I saw A Thousand Cuts and saw the synopsis and the team and you at the helm, it was so awesome to see. And also there's so many films that have been coming out about tech and different themes and different angles and different lenses on tech. And I feel like we're just entering into this era where we're going to see a lot more. I think it's only going to continue to grow because there's growing need for a critical lens on these companies.
Yeah, and I think there, yeah, and the awareness too, right, with the general public. I mean,
Yeah,
I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg. More people have to be
yeah.
aware. More people have to be really active consumers of tech.
Hmm.
But I think it's starting. I think we're getting to that point where even like once your parents start asking you about what is real, what is not,
Right.
okay, something's happening. Um, it's a
Absolutely.
good time. It's we're here with these two films that are well both timely and hopefully timeless.
Timely.
Is
Right.
always what we're trying to do. But so yeah, tell
Right.
me. You always seem to like hit with your films like climate, tech. How do you come to um, choose the stuff you want to do? Like,
Yeah.
and I know choosing is only the first part of it because then you have to really reckon with the fact that you spent 2 years of your life, 3 years of
Right.
your life on it, even more.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting question, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts on this and your response. Um, for me, I think I don't know. I feel like I'm pretty well. I read the news. I stay on top of things, and if something is new and revelatory to me, I feel like it's going to be revelatory to others as well. And that seems like super simplistic, but honestly, I think that's part of how I've been making decisions around this. So in the case of the social dilemma, I had friends of mine who, and it was like this inside connection. I had friends of mine who, from college, from Stanford, worked in tech. And I started hearing in 2017 those friends from inside those companies saying there's a problem with the way that they made the software. And I had never, it was like, what are you talking about? Like huge light bulb. Like I've never heard this criticism before, especially not from people at Google or at Facebook or at Twitter. And and I think the mindset for me was like, okay, this is I haven't heard of this. And
What year
so
was
other people haven't
sorry?
heard of it too.
What year?
What was that?
How long ago was
That was
this?
2017 was the
Okay.
year for me where it sort of started. So it was spring of 2017 where Tristan Harris, he's one of our main subjects in the film. He started speaking publicly. He left Google and started criticizing Google publicly. And I remember he posted something. Ironically, he posted something on Facebook, and I was a really heavy Facebook user. And his post on Facebook was, "Here, I'm about to go on Anderson Cooper on 60 Minutes to talk about how Google is, using manipulative design techniques." And like all of that, it was like a friend from college was on Anderson Cooper ripping apart the tech industry, and I was that was the first instance of hearing it. So for me, it was then trying to, follow that story, find more people, learn as quickly as I could what are people talking about. And I remember that first year, I had a bunch of friends that still worked at the companies, and I could feel their hesitation. Like I felt like I was walking on thin ice with everybody that I was talking to. And I couldn't say, oh yeah, we're coming out and criticizing tech. And that wasn't actually the goal. The goal was to like discover the truth, like what's here. But I needed to talk to different people and like, so what do you think about tech addiction? What do you think about, manipulative design? What's the problem with our technology? And some people I think had still been drinking the Kool-Aid in some ways, and other people like were completely of a different mindset. And um, that was for me, that was the entrance into the subject and the fascination there, because I hadn't heard about it, and I thought others would resonate as well. I'm curious for you, like, tell me about how you met Maria and how the project started. I mean, Maria Ressa is just such a freaking fascinating powerhouse human being,
Yeah.
and you totally hit it out of the park with her as a subject and protagonist. How did that unfold for you?
Um, it's so funny because you're talking about Facebook and how you saw this post from Tristan. My story also began with Facebook. It's so weird and ironic, and given the subjects of our
Hmm.
films. But I was finishing Motherland, my previous film, and I started, and then President Duterte in the Philippines, ascended to power. He became president, and shortly after he became president, he implemented the drug war. He ran on it. He said he was going to go after drug users and drug pushers, and he was going to kill him. And he did right after he became president. And so I started seeing this really horrific photographs on Facebook, and I said, something's going on, so because I was born and raised under martial law in the Philippines. So it felt very regressive to me. I'm like, well, what is going on? I thought we were past this. So that's what drew me back to the Philippines, really the drug war. But when I got there, a lot of people, a lot of filmmakers were doing that film. I'm like, let me look
Right.
around. And I looked around, and there was Maria Ressa and Rappler. They were talking about the drug war, but they were also connecting it to the weaponization of social media and propaganda and algorithms and disinformation, and she was explaining it so well and clearly, just the connection
Right.
and the networks. And like you, I was like, oh my gosh, right? I'm like, it was like this
Yeah.
light bulb moment, because and then it makes the story obviously more resonant globally because it's happening everywhere. It's still very specifically a Filipino film, but a Filipino story, but it has global resonances because of
Exactly.
disinformation. But it was
Right.
very much like you. I'm like, I didn't think I was making that film. But
Hmm.
as documentary filmmakers, we do explorations that lead us to
Yeah.
one place, to the next place, until you reach that place where okay, this is it. It's it. Like, we've done this before. Our instincts tell us this is the story you should be really pursuing right now. And you go.
Hmm.
I mean,
Right.
because I do very immersive, very taste observational stuff. I'm always sort of at the precipice, right? At this abyss.
Hmm.
I don't know if I don't know where it's gonna go. It's a crazy way to make film, but to me, it's exciting to make that kind of film, because I always think, like, if I
Right.
know how it's gonna end, then I should really be doing fiction, right? But now I don't know, and that is the exciting part of it, because you are exploring. And I think something you said, like,
That,
if it was exciting to you or surprising to you, it should be exciting to an audience. And that's how I feel too. I
hmm.
don't really have, I'm my first audience. I'm always, and
Hmm.
I know
Right.
it does sound simplistic, right? But it is. It's like, if I find this really surprising and amazing, someone else out there must
Right.
be,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
that's how it started for me.
Oh, so well, first of all, your notion on like if you know how it's going to end, I feel like that's where I feel all of the anxiety in nonfiction filmmaking. It's like, shoot, you go into it, you start exploring, and you're searching and you're following, and you exactly as you said, you're on this precipice, and I'm just like that. There's a stress that comes with that that is
Yes.
real and palpable, and it lasts for years, and you don't know where it's going to go. I remember so with Chasing Coral with my second feature film, there was a period we were trying to document how the coral reefs were changing, and we were trying to do time lapses of these corals, and we weren't capturing it. And there's a limited window of time when the corals actually bleach. It is like at the peak of summer when the temperatures hit a certain temperature, then the corals change. We almost didn't capture them. And I actually did an interview on camera with the notion of, if we didn't capture it, that was going to be the climax of the film. It's like the climax of the film might have had to be our failure to capture the coral bleaching, because it just eluded us, and I had no idea how we were going to end this movie otherwise. We just spent years trying to capture it. So I don't know, that there's a stress that can happen that is very real and painful. So I love that you embrace that and are seeking that out, because that's tough sometimes.
Yeah, but it's a
So
crazy way to make a film. If you tell like
it is.
yeah, because I'm now exploring fiction. If you tell that to fiction filmmakers,
Oh,
that is a crazy way. I said it is, but it is
right.
also where the magic happens, right?
Exactly.
Because the
Exactly.
unknown, if it pays off, it is so golden, and you know when it's
Yeah.
paying off. Something
Yeah.
tingles. You're like, so it's really exciting, but
Yeah.
it's a tough place to be, to
Yeah.
be exploring that. And
Yeah.
um, uh,
I'm curious. Can I throw you some questions around your process and how you launched into this film? Because it's interesting. You're from the Philippines originally, and then this story is based there. Did you have family there still? Did you have a support network? Did you know any crew there? Like,
yeah.
or did you just like pick up and land, and talk through those first steps of, you go in some ways back to the Philippines, and you're building a team out to document this. How long were you there for the shooting?
This is my fifth feature, and all my features have either been been between the Philippines and the States. So there's always an
Mm,
element of my films that take place in the Philippines. So I do have fixers there. They're most amazing
yeah.
fixers. They know the landscape. They know how to navigate security, which was very important for this film. But I usually bring in cinematographers and sound recordists, because
Mm,
I like using people I know, because as you know, when it's stressful, right? Not knowing what you're shooting.
yeah.
But so I think the people who I've worked with before, who I've worked with well, we share this sort of shorthand, and they know how I work, because sometimes you really
Hmm.
don't have time to have that conversation every day, right? So no,
Yeah.
having a base from which you can build. I think a foundation from which you can build is really important for my process. Yeah, so I do know people there. I'm still very plugged in, just because I've done a lot of work there.
Right.
Like with Maria, actually. Maria actually, well, Maria's very well known. She was the face of CNN in Southeast Asia for 20 years. She opened the
Wow.
Manila bureau, and then the Jakarta bureau of CNN, when CNN was very, very, very new in that region. So I knew of her. She was, I've known of her for a long time. I actually, back in '04, when I premiered my very first film, Imelda, I was flying back to the Philippines because Imelda Marcos sued us. The former first lady of the Philippines sued us in the Philippines. There was a temporary
Mm,
restraining order on the film, and I had to go back to actually defend it in court. So, and I was, and
wow.
it's one of those crazy film festival tours, right? That you're flying all over the place, and they said, "Come back to Manila, show up in court." I'm like, I really don't want to do this, but I had to, and I think I was on my way to Sydney, the Sydney Film Festival in Australia. So I did. I went to Manila first, and I'm dreading it because I didn't want to be in court with Imelda Marcos. And then when I land, the publicist said, all these, people, the news, want to talk to you. It's all the press who want to talk to you. And Maria Ressa from CNN was on the list. And I'm like, oh my God,
Oh.
Maria wants to talk to me, because, she was like, I'm like, of course. And then someone tells me, well, she doesn't really like the film, so she wants to talk to her. I said, oh, I don't want to talk to her. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to litigate my film. I wanted to talk about the litigation, but not talk about my film. I was just so tired. So I turned her down, and people said, no, don't turn her down, because, I'm like, no, I'm turning her down. So 14 years later, fast forward, right? I'm in her
Wow.
headquarters, in her office, pitching 1,000 cuts. And I thought, I should never remember. 14 years ago, come on, how many people has she, interviewed and stuff? And one of the first things out of her mouth was like, I've always wondered why you turned me down all those years ago. And I'm like, oh, and it's a moment where you're like, can you pretend? Can you get out of it? And I decided, I'm going to be fully honest with it. I said, I just didn't want dissent. I'm sorry. I just didn't have the energy to defend my film with you, and I'm sorry. I said it was young. It was my first film. I'd never do it again, blah, blah, blah. But that's how the relationship with Marie started.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I guess it worked out with you answering the question honestly like that, and it opened the door for jumping in and making this project, right?
Yeah. It's still an odd. It was still a very odd way to have follow a journalist, because they do stories um kind of differently. I mean, she did live shots, she did 2-minute pieces. So she would always, I tried to explain to her that we want to be first in the room and last to be kicked out, right? Basically, that's the goal. First in the room, last one out. And she would always turn to me after maybe 4 hours, whole day shooting. She goes, well, do you have it? I'm like, have what? She goes, do you have the film? I'm like, not yet. No, I think, no, of course not. She goes, you've been here for hours. So it was this constant, like, she turned to me, do you have it? Like, trying to understand what it was. And I can't even explain what it is until you know it, right? It's like you
Yeah.
rap and you sort of think,
But
you have a choral.
you're onto something here. Like, I think a lot of different subjects. So film subjects aren't used to the scale and scope required to make nonfiction, right? And when you have film subjects who are very, very press savvy or are journalists or have done a lot of press, they're used to cameras in a particular way. And any deviation from that seems like a huge shift and a huge lift. And I mean, there can be a lot of anxiety. Like, you're gonna film me, you're gonna follow me for how many years? Like, how long? Like, what, you want access to me in my hotel room and bedroom and in my, like, brushing my teeth in the bath? Like, there's a huge amount of trust, right, that has to be extended with film subjects. I know that in the case of The Social Dilemma, we were really actively trying to follow Tristan around as much as possible, and it became a burden and a sore. I'm sure he got tired of me, like, pestering him. And I typically my background is in cinematography, so I'm very, very comfortable with the cameras, and I know how to run sound gear. And so there are plenty of times where I do things sort of by myself, and I'll just run a wireless mic and run it directly into the camera and kind of operate solo, following somebody around. I think that has its pros and its cons, I'm realizing too, because sometimes I think subjects are like, oh, it's just you. Like, it seems smaller in scope. Sometimes it gives you more access, but sometimes it makes it feel like less formal or official or less proper, because there isn't like a crew. So I don't know. There are definite pros and cons to that strategy. I don't know. I think it's worked out overall so far, but.
I think when they're less, they think it's less formal, and so they're less on. So it works,
Right.
It's like, this is like the smaller part of whatever that smaller part is. But I was also very ready. Like, there was always, I had 2 units in the ground making this film, but there was always a smaller DSLR for me to pick up. That was always
Oh.
set to go, just in case it was places that no one else could be in, right? Or it was just where
Right.
you would say, just you. But she never said that. I mean, to be really fair, the minute she said yes, before signing anything, because I don't typically ask people to sign anything. It's really their word, because I feel like that paper will always get in the way. And what are you gonna do, Jeff? I mean, you're not gonna force people to give you that access.
Right.
Even if they sign a piece of paper, you're gonna sue them. That's never gonna happen. I mean,
Right.
how crazy is that? So I don't think that the paper in the end works. Which I know it goes against everything
like,
people say, but
right.
it's trust.
But you're talking about just a regular release, because I mean, the lawyers want a release for us to sell the movie or something. So
no,
you
to sell the movie, yeah, at the end, right?
Yeah.
When you're selling the film,
Okay.
yes, everyone. Of course, she signed a whole like
Okay.
major deal memo, because she signed for Rappler, for all the journeys, for herself, for
Right.
archive.
Right.
But I think in that initial, when you ask them, right, and then
Yeah.
to me, it's a big turn off to say, well, can you sign? Because
I'm with you on
that
that
piece
completely.
of paper is never gonna hold. I mean, if they don't want to be filmed, they don't want to be filmed, right? You can't ever
Exactly.
force them. And it's when you say, you really want to follow them and it's a toothbrush, like a brushing your teeth moment, you've turned a corner when you can film them,
Yeah.
or sleeping in the car. We say, did we get the sleeping in the car moment? But I
Right.
never tell them really that it's a slow reveal what I really want,
Mm-hmm.
because I think if they knew all at once what it was, like we followed them for years, they would never
Right.
do it. I mean, I wouldn't, and
Right.
I wouldn't say yes to
Right.
it. So yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah, I'm with you on that. And it is, yeah, it is trust that's grown over time. And I'm with you. I don't think if somebody's doing a sit down interview and we're just going to talk to them
Yeah.
for, an hour or two, then we do the release and, sometimes have them sign the release before we start the interview and then go into it. But typically I'm with you. I think for those long relationships, the trust is so important, and the release can get in the way and can feel, the goal is not to make it feel like a contract, right? It is not a contractual thing. This is a, creative alignment and following somebody for a long time, which is a huge imposition on their life. And they
Mhm.
need to, I don't know, I felt like I try to share with subjects just how difficult it's going to be, right? It's going to take a long time. And I don't know, we've been working with subjects who are working on issues that they feel the urgency of the issue, whether it's climate change or technology. It's like, hey guys, we need the movie last year. Like there's so much pressure from the subjects around when is it going to be done? Like, even it's not done yet. Like, it's like, no, these things take
So
time.
true.
Give us some time. Trust us. And it's really, really hard to build that trust sometimes. But I think once you find that alignment, and they see you're in it for the long run, there's that extension of trust as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify. Yeah, if it's interviews and one-offs, you do that release right
Mm,
after. But if it is a long relationship, and there are ways too, they're very aware that I always say, okay, so you're ready to film, and I'm being recorded, so that also can stand up. There is a expectation that we're there. They see the camera, everyone's
right.
cool with it. So um, there are ways to make sure that you get it on cam, but
Yeah.
never.
Yeah.
Yeah, people listening to this will be like, "What? We've been told to get." Yeah, but it is about trust at the end, because
Yeah.
no one can make people do something they don't want to do, and it
Right.
isn't ever going to happen. So you have to build a trust with people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You made a comment about when people need to feel on, like and I think that's something, as as documentary filmmakers, I think we're always watching our subjects and seeing them and seeing when they're actually themselves versus when they're projecting or performing for the camera, or they're aware that the cameras are rolling and they put on a persona. Like, I feel like that always happens. I think that's one of the reasons why I love using wireless lavs, because with a wireless mic, they forget that the microphone is there. I love, like, first thing, put the microphone on and step back, and you're seeing them say hello, whatever, and then they're wired, and then they can go and do whatever. And I don't know, for a lot of nonfiction, I feel like a boom pole is a really intimidating thing, right? Having a boom hang over you, you're like always aware, like, oh, I'm being documented right now. Um, but a long lens, you can stand back and have a long lens and a wireless mic and be in there and be intimate, and the subject doesn't feel like you're that close to them. So
Yeah.
that's the yeah, I definitely prefer that type of operation, just to give them that freedom and flexibility, and not having them feel like they have to perform.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we always start with a long lens, not being in their
Hmm.
space, so we
Hmm.
gradually come into their space. But I think those
Hmm.
first few days, even the first week of filming, it's always long lens. So we're always away until they get,
Hmm.
I mean, they see us there, so they're aware. And then we slowly move into their space. But it's not
Hmm.
an immediate in your space, that,
Right.
yeah. So, yeah, and the lab,
Film.
that's also the very first thing we do. We mic people up, and then you can go. And sometimes
Yeah.
they forget, and sometimes they don't. When they forget, they've forgotten when they go to the bathroom, right? And then they don't turn it off, oh my God, they forgot. And then you turn it, we stop recording because
Right.
that's also not
Right.
ethical to
Right.
be filming them in
Exactly.
the bathroom. But then, oh my God, they really forgot, right? But if
Yeah.
they still turn it off in the bathroom, I'm like, oh, they're still aware. They're still aware. But
Yeah.
it always comes some time and they forget. And you're like,
That's
okay.
funny. That's very true. Tell me, I'm curious from a scheduling perspective, because okay, you picked Maria as a subject and you're working with her. I mean, you were just referencing, the first few days or first week of filming. Do you typically do like a big chunk together, and then like how do you gap out a big phase of production, then time off, then more production? Because there's just an infinite number of ways to proceed like that.
I like having what I call containers in my films. So
Mm,
like a year, like when I filmed teachers recruited from the Philippines to teach in inner city Baltimore for the learning, for example, I wanted their freshman year here, right? So it's a container
mm-hmm.
and seasons. I like containers because the truth of the matter is I hate not knowing when I'm going to end. I hate those
Yes.
endless shoots. It's like, oh my God. And with Maria, she has cases. So it couldn't depend on the case, right? She has like 10
Mm,
court cases. I wasn't about to, it's not about following all those court cases. We can be talking about 5 years, 10 years, it's just impossible to go after legal cases. So I knew then, I think at some point during prep in 2018, the midterm elections were coming up the year after in 2019. So I knew that was my container. It was against the backdrop of midterm elections, but I knew very clearly in my head it wasn't going to be a campaign film. But that was the
mm,
backdrop, and I knew it was going to be kinetic and cinematic because full of spectacle because that's what elections are in the Philippines. They're full of
right,
music
right.
movement. But what I didn't know, and this is pure, luck, not luck, but I guess serendipity, was that the day after campaigning began, Maria gets her first arrest warrant, right? She's arrested. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
day after campaigning began, and then 5 weeks later, again, she gets arrested again, and then she gets time 100. And then, so in the course of, I chose a container. I thought, okay, Maria is just going to be fighting her fight over that. But I didn't think it would be so dramatic. And by then, we had
Mm,
full access, right? So
right.
I tried to stay away from breaking news of the drug war, but then Maria became breaking news. I'm like, oh my God, I,
Right.
I don't know how to handle breaking news. I don't have the capacity to fight the press. But by then, she had given us full access. So we were the ones
Uh-huh.
who were jumping in the car with her after being arrested, for example. So now we had
Yeah.
to pull back, right? Show the press covering her. The press covering the press really was what it was in the case of Maria. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so when these things happen that I couldn't have written it that way. I mean, that's like, right?
Right. Of
It's
course.
really like courting disappointment. If you say the next day Maria will get into more trouble.
Right.
And then but it happens. And then you're like, okay, we're going. And then the end of May was elections happened and we wrapped. And then we still followed her sort of traveling some, but we started post already. And then
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then we had what, half a year before. Well, we had less than that for Sundance because we didn't really expect to be at
Right.
Sundance, but you know, so lucky that they took us last year.
Yeah. Yeah, I love your notion of a container. I haven't operated that way. Now you've got me thinking like, oh, that's a good way to, because I
How
think
did you do it? How do you
we've been falling into the never-ending timeline. Like there's no end date, and like what? So in Tristan's case, it was looking for like where is his story going to come to some sort of conclusion? Like what's the climax of Tristan's story? And trying to document that, and then also recognizing, well, here he's basically become an activist who's on this never-ending quest. There is no conclusion, there is no climax in some ways. He ended up doing a Senate hearing, and that was a big moment in his life and for the film, and so we were able to document that and sort of built that into the climax of his story arc. But part of it, with the uniqueness of the social dilemma and sort of this narrative through line that we built into the film, we sort of used the climax of the narrative as the climax of the film and built around the ideas of the existential threat being the climax of the film. But that was something that it took a really long time for us to figure out, how are we going to end this movie with this potential for this never ending, you know, traveling around the world and doing speaking engagements that Tristan was doing.
But when
So
when
I think
the
that was,
narrative thread, when did you think that that was going to be an element in social dilemma?
Yeah, interesting. So for the first year, as I said, we started like in 2017 conceptually. The end of 2017 is when I was talking with Tristan regularly and seeing if he would agree, and wanting him to be clear, like, this is going to be a big commitment, right? And like, I only want you to do this if you're aware of like the level of commitment this is going to be. And so in January of 2018, that's when we first started filming, and he just founded his nonprofit, the Center for Humane Technology, and he started doing a bunch of press, and he was doing like a little press junket in New York. So that's one of the first things that we started filming with him, and started filming him. You know, he went to DC and he went to lobby in Congress, and he was doing events like that. And in I guess it was probably April of 2018, April, May, something like that, we did an extended like 2 weeks of sit down interviews with a whole bunch of different people that we met through Tristan, through his organization, and others that we had known through the tech industry, and did a bulk of our interviews. And at that point it was like, okay, this movie could be all talking heads. Like, this easily could be a wall to wall intellectual talking head film. And we were searching for Tristan's like cinema verite to be another backbone, and how do we interweave the talking heads and the cinema verite. And that was kind of the original framing and thinking. It was in that process that we kept learning about the algorithms, and kept learning about like what is an algorithm, what is it doing, how is it controlled, and that was just such a concept that I was not familiar with and was constantly learning. I mean, for me, I love looking back at the original interviews and the original transcripts, and I can see like, oh, I asked that question, like, that seems so basic to me now, but I remember that question was a genuine, I didn't understand that thing at the time. I think
Yeah.
that's what I love about nonfiction filmmaking so much, is like we get to be students, like we get to be full-time professional students with access to whoever you can get access to, and like, great, I'm going to ask these engineers how the software works. It just seemed like such a special thing. I still go back to them. It's like, there are times where somebody asks me a question I don't know, and I text somebody, I'm like, how does this work? Like, and to have that like direct access to somebody is kind of cool. But it was somewhere in that process where we saw it could be all talking heads. We wanted to challenge ourselves creatively. We wanted to make it more accessible to the audience, and we were learning about how the algorithms worked. And we started joking around, like, you know, there's Inside Out, the Pixar film. There's the Woody Allen film, Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Too Afraid to Ask. There are a handful of different films that sort of go into the human body, and they anthropomorphize emotions in the body, or like there's a control center. And that just we were sort of joking about that one day around, I remember the joke was around Will Ferrell. Like, imagine Will Ferrell was standing there at a control center and controlling what you saw on your phone. And that's where it started. And we just kind of kept riffing on that idea. And we were learning about the way the algorithms work and resurrections and different things. And so that whole concept of this fictional narrative came out of, how do we bring the algorithms to life? And could we do something like that? And then I remember I was sitting on a plane one day, flying to meet up with Tristan and his team, and I was just journaling. I was writing my journal, and I remembered like the idea just crystallized. As opposed to like a little scene or a little vignette, we can actually have an entire story that is showing all these different things that we've learned about the algorithms, and we can show how it's affecting people at the same time and see both sides of that. And I was super excited about it, but then I was like nervous to tell my producer and my creative team, like, oh, hold on, this is a completely different curveball idea, and I don't know if it's going to work or not. It was, and so we went down that path. It was a huge creative challenge with our writer and editor. We spent so much time mocking everything up. We wrote an independent script, so a 40-page script for the narrative stuff, which worked as a standalone script, but then we had to interweave it with the documentary. I felt like we were making 3 movies. Like, we were making the documentary, we were making the AI story, and then we were making the human story, and we had to get the scenes to transition, and we storyboarded the whole movie and edited it into the documentary. So that was a big phase. Yeah, that's a long-winded. It's weird. It feels
No,
like I'm just reliving trauma right now.
I know exactly what you mean. But when you said like you had to go back then to your producers and the stakeholders, it's always this moment where, hey guys, good news, but good news, bad news, right? It's always
Right,
like good
exactly.
news, I have a great idea, but bad, it's not exactly the film that I told you
Mm-hmm.
about, right? But
Right.
I've been at those like instances, like, hey, great news, but so and I'm so
I
happy
think that's,
we have supporters who will say, okay, go do that,
yeah.
right? Because you don't
I
know.
was I was just gonna say, like, I think that's one of the blessings of the independent route, and having supporters that believe in you and believe in your work and your approach. I know I just feel like a lot of studios wouldn't necessarily support that creativity or that exploration. Where, wait a second, you sold us on this idea, that was the budget, that's what we greenlit, you have to stick to that. But I think that's something that's so beautiful about the Sundance community, about the independent community, about like the notion of following the story where it needs to go, which I think is, for nonfiction films and for nonfiction feature films in particular, I think that's where the most beautiful work can come from. Like, it is the open-ended exploration, and it's the following the muses and the
Yeah,
inspiration where it leads you, and you don't know where a story might take you. And from my experience, that's some of the most magical and some of the best stuff, if you have the time and resources and
yeah,
team and support to allow you to do that, which I recognize is not always the case. But that's it,
yeah.
it's a beautiful balance if you can find it.
Yeah, I think the producers and the funders, the stakeholders will follow you for as long as you stick to the original themes, right? Like my
Yeah.
theme was not necessarily press freedom, right? It wasn't. It was about
Right.
power and impunity,
Mm-hmm.
and the rise of authoritarianism. So it wasn't necessarily the
Mm-hmm.
erosion of press freedom. That wasn't even in the equation,
Mm-hmm.
but it was about life under Duterte. So I think if the
Mm-hmm.
themes remain the same, they will
Right.
take a chance with you, right? Something has
Right.
to remain the same, right? I mean, and the bigger themes, but in terms of
Right.
narrative and how you then tackle those themes, it changes because you find characters that you didn't know existed before. I mean, Maria was nowhere in my
Right.
first pitch. I mean, she was nowhere. I mean,
Ah,
I did
interesting.
not pitch her. And then I discovered her and I'm like, oh my God. And then she was included in it, but she was only part of a
Mm-hmm.
bigger, what I call ensemble cast. Because the way I was pitching this, A Thousand Cuts in the beginning was very Robert Altman-esque, right? Very ensemble.
Mm.
And I referenced Shortcuts. I don't know if you know Shortcuts. Robert Altman, there was like this there was insecticide was being sprayed onto LA because there was this fruit fly uh, 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 crazy problem this summer. And so in my head, Duterte was a fruit fly, and Manila for LA. That was in my head. Of course, it doesn't turn out that way
That's
because
amazing.
life happens, and and then I always say the center of gravity shifts, right? And then it
Mm-hmm.
sort of then the major participant of the film, your major subject really emerges, and you can't turn away. When you can't turn away, you're like, okay, this is it. You gotta hear
Right. Right.
her story.
But
Yeah,
you're right. As long as you're on that theme, and it's if you can share with the team, this is a better representation of these ideas, or this is the best representation of these ideas. Um, I remember with Chasing Coral, with our previous film, we went in following one subject who was kind of the protagonist, and over the course of the film, it sort of revealed itself that there was somebody else on our team that we've been following, Zach Rago, who in some ways his story becomes the main story, and the backbone, that is personal care and compassion and empathy and love for the corals was a thing that we wanted to pivot to. And
yeah,
so, like, I remember calling up my producer and saying, like, I think that Zach's going to end up being like the main central emotional figure, and it was just like a huge curveball for everybody. But I think you have to trust your instincts and trust your gut on those things. And like we said, if there's the time and ability and support to explore those things and find where those threads lead. That's the magic and the challenge of nonfiction filmmaking in my mind, and the way that we tell feature stories. Part of me wishes that I had a story that, here's a story from 15 years ago where the ending, and like you can do a historical retrospective where the climax before you go into it. But this is this field of filmmaking, I think, is some of the most organic and raw. I kept thinking about Andi Timoner's We Live in Public. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's she documented these people for like a decade, going through countless different forms of technology over that course of time. And to think of a decade-long documentation like that, it shows itself in the filmmaking and the power of that storytelling. And I don't know, it gives me a little bit more hope. Not that I'm trying to do a decade-long project, but just to know like there are ways out. If you need more time, you can figure it out.
Yeah, it's a figuring out. It's also the pivoting that's scary, right? It's a scary thing to do, but when it becomes really obvious that you have to do it, you just have to jump in. Like my previous film, Motherland, was not at all about the busiest maternity hospital in the world. I mean, reproductive health and reproductive justice were the themes, but it looked completely different from my initial pitch. But when I found the place, I found the form, I said, guys, this is it. This is the film. Trust me. And, it's always like, trust me, this is the film. And yes, recognizing that support is not always there, right? So it's lucky.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the field is coming to realize, stakeholders coming to realize that is the way to work, right? To trust the filmmaker, that
Right.
things will change, because it's an ever,
Mm-hmm.
it's life happening in front of the lens. Things will take a turn, and and I think all filmmakers should be supported in that manner. It really,
exactly.
You come up with richer, more innovative films, I think.
Absolutely. I think we have to wrap soon, but Ramona, I wanted to ask you a question to kind of tie these together. We were talking about climaxes of films a little while ago, but then there's the resolution and the denouement, like the way you end and wrap up the bow at the end of a film. I wanted to ask you, what was your thinking with 1,000 Cuts and with your filmmaking around, like, what's that tone, that emotion that you want to leave an audience with at the very, very end, before they get up and leave their seats and they're going to go, back to their daily lives? How do you think about that with your filmmaking?
So that's a great question. I always try to mimic the major characters. In this case, in 1,000 Cuts, Maria's optimism. I couldn't end on a down note because she's so optimistic, and I wanted to reflect that in the end. So when we got into Sundance, I did not have an end. I'm like, what is the end of this film? So I actually flew back to Manila like a month before to get the ending, and it was the holidays. So I said, let's film a Christmas holiday, or right, celebrating the year, wrapping it up that way. So I thought of it as a positive thing, right? Celebrating the year. And Maria's always positive at those parties. Like, it's always about love and caring, because that's Maria. And I wanted to end on that note. So at the Sundance premiere, that was the end. But then life happens, right? Mid-year, in a pandemic year, she gets a verdict and she's found guilty in June 15th. So we couldn't ignore that. So right before we went on the virtual cinema, we had to add on her getting arrested and getting a verdict of up to 6 years for cyber libel. So that's how it ends now. But the two things, but she's still very positive, because she goes, you must defend your rights, or you must use your rights, or you will lose them, right? It's still a very, in a way, positive, but it completely changed the end. And now you see everyone in masks, because it's the middle of the pandemic. It's like from 6 months, from end of 2019 to mid 2020, everyone is masked, and it puts you right in the middle of like pandemic here, right in the middle of COVID. But we felt like we couldn't ignore it. We had to put it, realizing that it's really gonna change it in a way, right? It's not the up
Mm-hmm.
hopeful, still hopeful because Maria's hopeful, right? She's still always
Mm-hmm.
fighting, even if she just got,
Right.
she just got a sentence of up to 6 years in prison. She was still very articulate and very clear on that she had to keep fighting, and
Right.
that in itself is
Right.
positive. Yeah. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. How did you? Oh,
Yeah,
you decided. Oh, but the narrative ends yours, right? The narrative ends
yeah,
yours.
we kind of, I think in a similar way, we're talking about these big themes and these big issues, and you don't want to leave an audience on a depressed note. You don't want to leave them in a, like, okay, great, I'm gonna go, like, now what? I mean, I think there's a tension that we always have to balance there, but I think for our whole team, we were looking for that optimism and that positivity as well. We sort of close with the note that we can change this technology. This is technology that was made by people and can be changed by people. It's just code, and leaving people with that somewhat uplifting and hopeful sense that we can rebuild this if we choose to, and we can make this technology better for all of us if we choose to. And that both means putting pressure on the companies, and we need legislation and all of this. And we did try to use the end credits. I'm a fan of using end credits as like the body of the film still, because it is this, people can stick around for the credits if you do have that content continuing. So we use that as like all the tips and suggestions that that our experts gave us over the course of making the film, and tried to tie it all together with that, and encourage people to to be more aware of their technology in that process. But this has been such an awesome conversation, Ramona. I'm
This
so
is
thrilled,
great.
so good to dive in with you, and so thankful to ADOC for hosting this and supporting all of the amazing Asian American filmmakers and Pacific Islander filmmakers that are out there this year, and making a difference and getting seen with their work. So this has been a thrilling time with you.
Yeah. It's certainly a watershed year for Asian American filmmakers. I feel the shift, coming. I hope it's real. I think it's real.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just been this is great conversation. I love having conversations with other filmmakers and talk about process.
Absolutely.
It's really enjoyable and
Absolutely.
it's just fun. So thanks.
Thank you. Yep. Thanks so much, Ramona.